Josh, the biggest story of the week was the dog that didn't bark. Prime Minister Netanyahu went to the White House for the third time in 6 months. It's really kind of a record. And we were all leaning in for an announcement. We didn't get one. What happened? What do you expect to happen? And when do you expect it to happen?
Well, here was quite an eventful week. The three visits in the last 6 months, right after the Israeli strikes and the American strikes against Iran's nuclear program, were made for a very eventful visit. But you're right, no deliverable, no big announcement when it came to the possibility of a ceasefire. Now, I still think, and everything I've heard, everything we've heard from the conversations between the White House and the Israeli Prime Minister, is that that's still very likely to happen. But it's not going to be some grand deal. Most likely what we're going to be seeing is another exchange of, or I should say, we're expecting about ten of the surviving hostages to be released, Hamas prisoners perhaps getting released, and then some, small movements perhaps in Gaza. But there's not, within the Bibi coalition, there's still enough resistance to any kind of grand deal that would, at least end the war and kind of, move the page forward and try to negotiate with the Saudis and other allies to probably add to the Abraham Accords, which is, I think, a big priority for many in the administration and some in Israeli government. But I think the big thing we're going to be watching in the next week is some kind of partial deal, a ceasefire in which maybe half of the surviving hostages being held are released as part of some partial deal.
There is that passage in Scripture when Abraham is walking along with the Lord, and he said, if I can find 10 people. And so I keep thinking of that we started with 250 hostages. Many have been tragically murdered or killed in the course of this very long war, down to 20 living hostages. You get 10 out. You're really getting down to where Hamas has got very little leverage left, even though one human life is infinite. And I think they're running out of gas. They're cut off from the mothership. And so it just takes some patience. What I'm really looking for is sort of the declaration of concession by Iran and Hezbollah, because they've both been banged up so badly by the IDF. Am I wrong to be an optimist about that?
Well, as far as Hezbollah goes, number one, very notable that they didn't do anything during the 12-day war. That they were silent. They've been defeated and now, degraded to the point where, like, I think the big worry in Israel is that there was going to be, before the war in June, if there was going to be a war, that Hezbollah would be a big threat to kind of fight this multi-front challenge. And Hezbollah was totally taken off the table, which is, I think, a major accomplishment. The big conversation in kind of Arab in Lebanon, and I know Steve Witkoff was in the region recently. It's what role does Hezbollah play in Lebanese government, and how does that affect their militant and terroristic aspirations? That's an open question. I think the Americans have been a little more sanguine about Hezbollah's role than the Israelis, but certainly they are not the same Hezbollah as they were before the pager operation, and it's been pretty significant. And frankly, the fact that Iran has been degraded and defanged as a result of the 12-day war, the strikes against their nuclear facilities, they can't support their proxies in the same way as they could before.
I listened to Jonathan Shanzer this morning doing the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's morning report. I had no idea the kind of cash problem that Iran has. Iran's out of money, and their GDP has collapsed, and now they've been embarrassed to the world. That's a regime in crisis. Because it's such a closed regime, I don't know that we really get a sense of how much crisis they're in. Do you think we do?
We don't have great visibility. I think a lot of times it's easy we saw this with the Soviet Union cube back in the 80s. I think a lot of the smartest intelligence analysts didn't realize how precarious the regime was before it collapsed in the late 1980s. So we don't have a lot of, I think, great visibility into the inside workings of the Ayatollah's regime. Certainly, there was an embarrassing defeat for them. Israel could kind of, and the United States could operate without impunity in taking out a lot of the top targets during the 12-day war. They don't have the finances to support their proxies. Most of the proxies that have been threatening Israel have been defeated thoroughly in the region, and that's a huge. I don't think we fully processed these regional developments that could and are very likely to lead to a new world order in the region, and maybe lead to peace, and lead to things that have been unthinkable in the recent past. I mean, Syria and Israel are talking about some type of peace agreement or at least diplomacy, which was unthinkable as long as Bashar al-Assad was in that.
That's
in
such an
charge in
excellent point. I've spent 50 years watching the Middle East, and more changes happened since the massacre than in the 48 years prior. So it's really something. Let me close with this, Josh. I don't do other countries' politics. I watch it, but I don't try and predict it because I'm not even very good at doing my own country. When are they going to go to elections in Israel, do you think? And
Well,
what do you think of Netanyahu's chance?
yeah, I'm sort of upset. I mean, and I do know a little bit about American politics, but I always hate to extrapolate to other countries' politics. But it's kind of fascinating with Netanyahu. He is the big question in Israeli politics is does he call for elections at his high point? I mean, gotten a boost in the polls because of the great success against Iran during the last month's operations and the military successes. But he still is, not where this party not where he needs to be to feel comfortable about winning re-election. So all the we wrote about this in Jewish Insider last week, but all the smart people in Israel believe Netanyahu's going to maintain his coalition. It's been a little shaky at times, but maintain it into the 2026 elections. I don't think he's going to call early elections. And he's been spending a lot of time making sure that the right wing, and that's part of the peace process, the part of the negotiations going on, making sure that the right is still in the government and doesn't cause it to collapse. But I think that's going to happen, and I think we're probably going to have elections on their normally scheduled timeline in 2026.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.